Welcome to the Westview Podcast. This is Pastor Marty, and today we're going to be getting into the concept of why Matthew. This year, as we engage the Gospel of Matthew throughout the year, it will be interesting for us to engage a Gospel that's written just a little bit differently. And so I guess I could say the words why Matthew or why Matthew, I think are both different ways for us to kind of engage this. I want to talk a little bit about the discipleship element of Matthew. It is a theme of Matthew. It is the correct response to Jesus when hearing about him in Matthew. But it's important also to realize who that gospel was written for. So today we're going to start a short series on this gospel, not because Matthew is easy, but because Matthew is honest. This is a gospel that was written for people who are tired, uncertain, and still trying to follow Jesus anyway. Matthew isn't aimed at spiritual high achievers. It wasn't written for the good times. It's written for communities under pressure. Communities trying to figure out what faith looks like when certainty has cracked and the world no longer lines up neatly. If you've ever wondered whether discipleship still works in a fractured church or a divided culture, Matthew was written with you and me in mind. And I think that's why it's such a great way to kick off this year together. You know, Matthew isn't the earliest gospel that was written, and it is certainly not the shortest, but it may be the most intentional. It reads less like a memoir and more like a handbook, carefully structured, deliberately framed, and relentlessly focused on how followers of Jesus are formed together. First, I think it's important to lift up that Matthew is written to a community, not just individuals. I think we engage this as an individual experience a lot of times, but Matthew wasn't written for that. Most scholars place Matthew's gospel after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple around the year 70. That detail really matters because this is a Jewish Christian community that has just lost its spiritual center. It's under pressure from religious authorities, and it's also trying to figure out who they are without the structures that they have relied on up until that point. In other words, Matthew is written to a church living with grief, identity loss, and conflict. That context explains why Matthew emphasizes teaching so heavily. Long blocks of Jesus' instruction aren't there to inspire private devotion. They're there to shape communal life. Matthew isn't asking, what do you believe? He's asking a different question. He's saying, how are you going to live now? Martin Luther understood this deeply. He wrote once that faith, this is the quote, is a living, busy, active, mighty thing, unquote. Faith is not an idea that you would hold. It's a life that gets lived. Matthew assumes that people are staying, not because things are working, but because leaving isn't really an option anymore for people who have followed Jesus up until this point. This gospel is written for people who are in too deep to quit. The second element of Matthew that's sort of another general theme that is one of the most striking things in the gospel is how little Jesus takes time to explain before calling people to follow him. Fishermen drop their nets. A tax collector leaves his booth. There's no theological exam, no clarity really, and no promise that this will turn out well. In Matthew, discipleship is not agreement, it's alignment. You step into a way of life, and understanding comes later, if it comes at all. The disciples misunderstood Jesus constantly. They argue about power, they panic under pressure, and they say the wrong thing at the worst possible moment. And Matthew never suggests that disqualifies them. Luther pushed against the idea that faith requires certainty. He wrote, quote, faith is not the absence of doubt. It is the confidence in God's promise in the midst of doubt, unquote. Matthew's disciples lived exactly there. They follow first. They struggle second. and somehow they are still disciples. This gospel refuses to shame confusion. It doesn't make fun of when we don't have all of the answers. It doesn't make fun of the people who just follow. It assumes formation happens while you're moving. The third piece of this overview of Matthew as we begin this study, Matthew is not shaping fans. He's not making fans for Jesus. He is shaping a church. And that's very different. It's very important. Matthew isn't out there trying to sell Jesus to make followers. He is shaping a church of people who have already begun to follow. Matthew ends with what we call the Great Commission, and it's often misunderstood. Jesus doesn't say, go win arguments or go grow an institution. He says, make disciples, teaching them to practice everything I have commanded you. Teaching in Matthew is not information transfer. It's formation over time. Then Matthew tells the truth. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. That line never gets resolved. That's that line of the resurrection. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Jesus doesn't fix their doubt before sending them. He commissions them anyway. Luther would say that this is life under the cross, where faith is real precisely because certainty is gone. The final promise Matthew offers is not success, clarity, or security. It is presence. I am with you always. The church does not exist because it has everything figured out. It exists because Jesus refuses to leave. So why Matthew? Or why Matthew? Or why Matthew? Because Matthew tells the truth about doubt, conflict, slow growth, and communities that don't get it right, but keep going anyway. This gospel doesn't flatter the church. It forms it. The next time we get together on this podcast, we're going to look at the unsettling simplicity at the heart of Matthew, the call to follow Jesus. Not after you understand, not after you're ready, but right where you are. Grace and peace be with you. I'm glad you're here. This is Pastor Marty at Westview Church. Please join us online. Please like, forward, and subscribe to our podcasts as we continue together in this time and place where doubt and faith are mixed together in a church that continues forward with a resurrected Christ. Have a great day, everybody. Peace be with you. Bye-bye.